If we look at statistics, the best place for me to live as a woman would be Iceland. It's been headlining the global gender gap report for 15 years, and basically it's the place where humanity has gotten the closest as possible to gender equality so far. So why is it also one of the countries with the highest rate of gender-based violence in Europe? That's what's been called the Noordse Paradox. Most of the year outside it looks like this here, cold and dark. So Icelanders spend a lot of the year indoors with their loved ones. But for some, home is not necessarily a safe place. According to the latest report by Icelandic police, the rate of domestic violence has gone up by almost 40% in 10 years. This is a far cry from the portrait of a women's paradise that Iceland is often depicted as.
My name is Alexandra and I'm 33 years old. I work here at the shelter. My main goal here is just to provide this comfy and friendly environment for the women who come here. No problem. This shelter was made in 1982 and it was actually just a few women who came together and decided that Iceland needed shelter for women in abusive relationships. I started working here almost a year ago. This shelter has always a lot of impact on me because when I was a child I used to stay here with my mom and siblings. So I always knew that I wanted to work in this field and be part of the women's journey when they start putting their life back together. Yes. How far along are you now? 24 weeks. 24 weeks, wow. So the midwife came here the other day. Did you hear the heartbeat?
Yeah, a little bit.
I am able to meet the women where they need to be met. Sometimes it's just by being a friendly face. Sometimes it's being there just to talk or support. And sometimes it's just goofing around with their kids and coloring. And I really love it. Yeah.
Alexandra and her colleagues keep the shelter open 24/7. Every year, they welcome about 100 women along with their children for however long is necessary, free of charge. On top of providing secure accommodation, the shelter provides long-term support to residents who can continue to receive help even after they've left. In 2023, 24% of the women housed here were able to go live in new accommodation. 14% moved back in with their abuser.
Over the past few years, we have started to talk more openly about what's really going on in Iceland behind closed doors. I think even though we are more open about it, it's not necessarily bringing the awareness that we really need regarding this topic. Women are still afraid to telling when something happens to them because they are still afraid what the society will act like towards them. We have women who are cancelled from maybe a whole town because they told that someone raped them, and we still have the tendency you are willing to believe your sister when she gets raped, but you're not willing to believe that your brother raped someone.
What do you think of this image that Iceland has to be the heaven for women?
I would say this idea of Iceland being the safest and best country in the world for women, it's not necessarily bullshit, but it's not all true. When we don't need bigger shelters because we have so many women who are fleeing domestic violence, and when I am with friends and we are four, that one of us at least has been raped, when that changes, I can have that discussion again.
Iceland holds a lot of records when it comes to gender equality. In 2018, it was the first country in Europe to adopt a legal definition of rape based on consent. And in the same year, it was the first country in the world to make equal pay mandatory in the workplace. These recent wins are the continuation of a historical track record of fighting for gender equality. 50 years ago, in October 1975, 90% of Iceland's women went on general strike, stopping work at home and at their jobs to demand more rights. They won a number of them, including the right to abortion.
Iceland looks good on papers because we have been like doing a lot that's good for women's rights. But the thing is that it's much easier to get some idea how the working industry is. When you're looking at the work industry, you can measure it. Just, yes, okay, we have like 40% women and 60% men. What are their salaries and what is the difference? You cannot do that when it comes to like human behavior.
It's true that measuring issues like gender-based violence is a lot harder than, say, wages or employment opportunities. Despite this, there's been a few attempts. The study that caused the biggest stir dates back to 2018. It revealed that 1 in 4 women in Iceland had been raped or sexually assaulted. In that same year, the European average was 1 in 10 women. These results illustrate what several specialists called the Noordse Paradox. In short, several Northern European countries, in spite of being the best ranked in terms of gender equality, also have very high rates of domestic violence. But as always, we need to look at this with a bit more nuance.
Rates of violence are not just measuring how common violence but it's also measuring how willing people are to disclose violence. Are you willing to tell someone on a survey or in an interview that this has happened to you in the past or is actually happening right now? In some ways, it can actually be a good sign to have a high rate because it means that survivors are more willing to talk about their experiences.
It makes sense. If a society is open to addressing a certain issue and conditions are created for victims to safely come forward, more reports will be made and numbers go up. And that's not just true about Iceland. Earlier, we were talking about the 2018 report that stated that 1 in 10 women had experienced gender-based violence in Europe. In 2024, another report was published that revealed this number has gone up to 1 in 3 women.
However, when we look at other indicators of violence, not just whether this has happened to you at any point in your life, but ask rather, are you currently in a violent relationship that you would like to leave? Then we see a really interesting relationship where in more gender equal societies, that number or that rate is significantly lower than in other societies. The gender equality index as such is really broad. It takes into account so many social factors to do with finances and the home and health and all sorts of things. It has more to do with not just that violence takes place, but also how societies respond to violence.
But numbers and statistics aren't enough to convince a society to evolve. Change also comes through pop culture.
My name is Hildur. I am a musician, producer, songwriter, and I am 37 years old. As an artist, I have a platform to use and speak up. When I started in the music industry, I was really quick to understand that this was not this perfect world that I thought of maybe at first. For example, when I was 18, I started a band. I started hearing sexist comments. When I started playing, people would say stupid things like, do you know how your gear works and stuff like this. This is very different for women because my male colleagues in the band, nobody ever said anything like that to them. It's like a mix of, having these experience, but then also having like really strong Icelandic role models, for example, like Björk, which has been like one of my biggest role models since I was a kid. In 2015 or so, Ketone was started here in Iceland, which is like this organization for women in music, and that was basically started because there was so much inequality. A lot of the times when I've, spoken publicly about, sexism in the music industry, it has been kind of a backlash, or negative comments, or stuff like that, which is hard and it's tiring. So you have to kind of pick your battles as well. I have at least written one song which is called Woman at War. I kind of wrote it for myself after this hard time of being in the public image, talking about sexism and getting this backlash. I had to draw myself out of it for some time because it was so hard to be at war. It's not terrible the situation here. It's still almost every day that I read some news or I hear a story that reminds me that you know, it's not just the matter that you have a female president. It's also like what is actually happening, you know, in the society.
So, in a country that already formally ticks so many equality boxes, how do we effectively move forward? All of the women we spoke to said more or less the same thing. You have to change the judicial system. In 2021, 9 women filed a complaint against the Icelandic state with the European Court of Human Rights. They accused the police and the legal system of being misogynistic and of mishandling the legal cases of survivors of gender-based violence. But 4 years later, their case is at a standstill.
We have a really strong feminism movement, but then people are pointing out, look at some countries in Africa or something where women don't have any rights, like you have it fine here. So that's like also been sometimes used like against us, which is annoying. Every day has to change, like people in their homes need to change. I'm hopeful that every story that is told about domestic violence or so on, I'm hopeful that, you know, slowly it starts to open more eyes. I feel like in that sense, these movements like Me Too and so on, they shook the country really hard, because we didn't need that women for it still to be like, you know, very widespread. That's definitely one good thing about being part of a small society, is that like it can be like a shorter way to get noticed.